We only get to see a few years of Harry's life in the story, but what happens after that? What happens after Hogwarts? Welcome to Harry Potter After Hogwarts.
Welcome to the Potter discussion.
Welcome back. This is episode 102 of the Potter discussion. On today's episode, we will be dissecting Harry's life after Hogwarts and seeing what it means for the story. Let's do this. Welcome back, everyone! Thank you for tuning in this week, and today, surprise, surprise, we are talking about Harry Potter. Today's episode, we are focusing mostly on Harry's life after Hogwarts. Now, I know we did do an episode similar to this a couple weeks back, but there is still some things to be said in Harry's life, and if you really think about it, we only saw maybe 7 or 8 years of Harry's existence in the Harry Potter series, and we have no idea, we didn't get an in-depth description of what happened after that in the books, except for the Cursed Child. We didn't really get any information on that, but I believe Harry is in his 30s by now, which is crazy, and we only saw 7 years of his life, so there's just so much that has happened after the fact. So I do think that it's just crazy if you think about there's so much more that's happening in Harry's life that we just aren't talking about. So in this episode, we are going to be talking about the things that we haven't talked about before, Harry's life, Harry's everything, what happens after Hogwarts, the whole shebang. And although I don't think Harry is there's really no death for him in the future, I think he's just gonna be immortalized as this 30-year-old Auror forever, just as the story of Harry Potter. But if his death comes, that's almost 80 years after the story. So there's 80 years of stuff that we didn't even get to see in Harry Potter's life. So if we do, it's a huge thing to be noticing, and I do think that if we can look at the stuff that we already have, we can definitely get a fuller picture of who Harry is, and that's today's episode. Before we get started, I will remind you that the 2 links in the description below are still available. The SpeakPipe page link and the Google Form link are still alive. If you want to click on those, send a voice submission or a text submission, anything you might want, ideas, questions, topics, jokes, whatever might come to mind, you can use those 2 links. They are still there. And if you don't want to use those 2 links, an email would be just fine. thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com. That is thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com for anything you might want me to know. Let's get into today's episode. And the very first thing that we are going to be talking about is Harry's career in law enforcement. We all know that that is the career that he decides to pursue after Hogwarts, and it does match up of who he is and kind of what he decides to do. His favorite subject by far, definitely defense against the dark arts. He was great at it, probably the best in his class, and that is because he has a very, very deep motivation to do well in that subject and to eventually conquer evil, in that he will kill Voldemort. And we all know that he did, and that seems to be the perfect bridge for Harry to then walk across and become an Auror, which is exactly what he does. Directly after the permanent appointment of Kingsley Shacklebolt as the Ministry of Magic, Harry actually takes over the Department of Magical Law Enforcement as the head, and that is a very poetic and very fitting end for the story, because Harry Potter is a very, very long and drawn-out story to be reading, but if Harry becomes an Auror, it just kind of is a really sweet end. He was fighting evil before, and then in his life, he is fighting evil. He is fighting evil again. That's just how it goes. And I definitely think that if Harry were to do something else, I think it would have eventually somehow led back to his, fighting of evil, or at least at least helping people, because after the fall of Voldemort, I doubt there would be many evil people clamoring for the position of Voldemort again after that. So I doubt Harry would have to handle much actual evil. But even if he didn't become an Auror, or much less the head of the Magical Law Enforcement Department, I think he would definitely take a position, if not in the Ministry, then somewhere else, where he was helping some section of people in just some way, just because that's what Harry does. He wants to make the world a better place, and he wants to do it himself, make sure everything is right in the world, and not a bad trait at all. But it is sometimes, it becomes something of a, I don't know what you would call it, something of a need, something of a draw. And Harry has that draw, but we can see that it doesn't always help him in the story. For example, in the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Part 1 or 2, getting confused, when he has that fight with Ron, we can see that he is kind of losing sight of the greater picture, and he just wants to do the right thing now, he wants to see what to do and then do it. Not think, but just do it. And when he had that fight with Ron, we can kind of see how Ron was complaining about not really getting Horcruxes. And I think Ron was a little bit in the wrong there. And then when Harry was saying all those mean things, I think Harry was also in the wrong. So they both had so much stress, and Ron, of course, was wearing the Horcrux, and Harry was trying to lead the whole operation of defeating the Dark Lord. So the situation wasn't healthy for anyone, despite the fact of the Horcruxes and the stress. So that is also a factor, but I think Harry is really losing sight of the fact that if they fight amongst each other, there's rarely a time then that they will be able to work efficiently together if they don't understand and appreciate each other's presences, because it might lead to them not having an efficient team and just kind of doing things out of sync. And what Harry didn't realize was that if he, continued on with his whole fight with Ron, then their team would have been broken up, forever, if not had Ron, had the Luminaire, if not Dumbledore thought ahead and given it to him. But Ron only found his way back because, I think he said right when he left, he wanted to come back. That's what Ron said. Although that might be true, I don't know if the same is, if it's the same with Harry. I think it's kind of like, if you're thinking right now, if you're listening to this, just think about it. If you have a fight with a friend, you will likely make up just because it's a friend or a close family member or something like that. But it's a strange thing, You're just kind of you pass each other every day, you see each other every day if it's a close friend, and you don't really say anything because you don't know what to say. And I think Harry was kind of in that stage where he didn't know what to think of the whole ordeal, and he didn't know how Ron would if he did come back. I don't think Harry was kind of thinking that if Ron did come back, how would they kind of make up as friends, and how would Harry kind of recover the pattern that they were developing in terms of making, better bonds and finding Horcruxes together. So I think that also plays into his future and the head of the law enforcement, or otherwise, if he didn't choose that path. His strengths and weaknesses, I think, are included in this. I think his major strength in being the head of the magical department of law enforcement. My name for that just changes every time. I know there's department, law, magical, and enforcement. I just say those in any order and assume that you understand what I mean. I hope you do, but that's kind of what I mean. So I'll just call it the Auror department. So when Harry becomes the head of the Auror department, I think his one major strength was kind of two in one, is his leadership skills and his magical skills. As a leader, he has experience as being the center of attention. He's been the center of attention for his whole life. Even with the Dursleys, they were always talking about how they wanted to squash the magic out of him. And even at his elementary school and his middle school, and when he was young, I think that also played into his attention. Everyone was kind of noticing, the weird kid. That was Harry in school. He was the weird kid. And of course, especially in Hogwarts, being Harry Potter even more famous than in elementary school and in middle school. But Harry is now used to the attention, and being then going into Hogwarts, and I think especially in the 5th, 6th, and 7th years, I think he definitely learned how to deal with stress. And he definitely learned how to move on from things and know when to leave projects and know when to pick them back up and kind of understand people and know how to work with a crowd. I think it's kind of a lot to take in, but if he just went, if he was the head of the art department, I think he would have gained some of those skills along the way and really honed the ideas in his mind that he needed to use in order to become an efficient leader. And I think one of his major weaknesses is he is a little bit stubborn and short-sighted. As much as he's the hero, Harry Potter is the hero, I don't know if he is the most considerate hero. Yes, he is a great friend, he's a good person, but he just has a very, straight line way of looking at things. There's good, there's evil. If you cross the straight line, there's nothing for it. You're, kind of out of the running of being a good person. And that also kind of plays into his stubbornness. Harry just has an idea, and then we even saw, I'm reading the 5th book right now, and I'm kind of, reading about seeing Hagrid and stuff like that, and the lessons and seeing Umbridge. Harry has a very specific idea in mind, and he really wants to carry that out. And yes, that could be a strength. That could be something that Harry could use to his advantage. But on the other side of that spectrum, that is a weakness. It's a weakness. And as much as Harry should be stubborn, as much as Harry should see ideas and go for them, if he goes for the ideas that don't work, what's for it? What's for his stubbornness if it's not useful? So even in the office, even in the Auror office, when people are talking to him, giving him ideas, Harry might not take the ideas as much as he should, being a good leader, because he has his own idea in his head that he wants to carry out, and he doesn't want to be proven wrong by someone who he thinks might not have the best idea. And it might sound mean, it might sound cruel, but that's just kind of a very extreme version of the struggles that Harry kind of has in his life. So that's just number 1. Another major factor after Hogwarts in Harry's life was the tethers and connections with Voldemort were cut. Now, I haven't read The Cursed Child in a very long time, but from what I can recall, I believe he is kind of noticing his parcel tongue is going away, his scar isn't hurting, and all the things that he was struggling with, his dreams are gone. All the things that he was struggling with before are gone. And that's probably because Voldemort is dead. Not probably. It is. It is because Voldemort is dead. And that really plays into his feeling of really being connected with Voldemort in the original books. And then when those connections are severed, I think Harry really has this kind of realization of, okay, we did it. Everything worked out. Voldemort is dead. We don't have to worry anymore. And I think that really helps with Harry's just overall sanity. I mean, after that whole traumatic experience with Voldemort, understanding that everything that he had with Voldemort, being with a part of Voldemort inside of him, I think it was like he could breathe freely for the first time. He could recognize the freedom that he had and finally appreciate that he wasn't working to defeat this massive powerhouse. He wasn't working to, tame a huge Goliath of evil. He wasn't working towards this goal that seemed impossible. He was working for something that he knew was right and that he knew he could succeed in. And it's a really refreshing thing to have that. It's really refreshing to have something that's not even that difficult to complete. And with Harry, being the head of the Auror office, not easy in the slightest, but being the head of the Auror office after being the face of the rebellion against the Dark Lord, maybe more manageable. So Harry's life after Hogwarts was definitely made a lot easier by the severing of ties with Voldemort's powers, and I think it might also be helping along his thought processes with Draco. And although Harry and Draco were bitter rivals in school, I think they kind of had an understanding of each other after the Battle of Hogwarts, and they understood that the other person, Harry thinking about Draco and Draco thinking about Harry, had been through so much and had experienced and sacrificed a ton. And they kind of then started working towards having a better relationship with each other. And that, I think, was definitely kind of drawn out in the 19 years later scene with seeing Draco in that, sorry, Don Belton, horrible costume. I mean, like, ridiculous. Who gave him that wig? Anyway, seeing Draco there and Harry kind of looking over and just like not shying away and just kind of looking away, but kind of like smiling, feeling good about Draco. He was glad he could then have a positive relationship with his bully, with the person who had hated him so. And that is another big part of him severing the negative ties he had in his years at Hogwarts, with Voldemort's Parseltongue and just Voldemort inside of him gone, and then the Draco's hatred. Apart from all the Death Eaters, I'd say Draco was probably the person who hated him the most. And then the Death Eaters would likely never forgive Harry, but if Draco did, I'd say Harry kind of thought of that as ultimate, like, I did it. I made up to everyone and I defeated Dark Lord. That's kind of his, I don't think he's really thinking of it this way, but I think that was his milestone. That was his big goal, to make sure that no one was, feeling like they were wronged and they never got to forgive Harry, and they were also kind of on the wrong side of the battle. When he managed to defeat Voldemort, most of the Death Eaters, and then be forgiven by the people who used to hate him, that's a pretty good thing to do. And even, it's just such a huge process because Draco has been going through so much in all the Draco episodes we've been doing. We're kind of learning about how his family is having so much pressure, and because his parents, I don't know if his parents went to Azkaban, but I can say they're definitely not seen again. But they were definitely kind of drawn away from Draco, and I think Draco really appreciated that. I think definitely for his father, he was like, yeah, see you, dude. But for his mom, it might have been more of his mom might have been more understanding, thinking like Draco, like, we have to do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know we've had a great relationship, but I think it's time that we have to say goodbye. And, you have to go with your life. Don't be connected to us. Don't be connected to Voldemort. Just go on, live your life, and make a name for yourself. And I think that really empowered Draco to move on. And then if Draco was kind of in this new light, trying to explore a new realm, forgiving Harry was really the first step in the right direction. And that was the same for Harry, seeing Draco and really forgiving him as well. I think the two kind of had a mutual forgiveness moment in that. And seeing their kids being sent to Hogwarts and recognizing that they may have been good friends and that they were once bullies doing the same thing that they were just sending their kids off to do. It was like a very, very nostalgic moment, kind of looking back on the good/bad old days and really seeing how their relationship evolved. And in that moment of Harry seeing Draco at the platform, I think it was a huge revelation for Draco and Harry almost at the same time, because they were sending off their kids and they were thinking, just at this time, however many years ago, we were going to hate each other so much, but now we don't. And I think that's kind of their thought process was, now we see each other as equals, and now we have a new appreciation for who we are. Before we move on, I also want to quickly mention the significance of Harry keeping in touch with Dudley, because at the the beginning of the Deathly Hallows and the end of Harry and Dudley's relationship, we really saw that it was really a performance. Dudley's hate for Harry wasn't hate, it wasn't dislike, it was just seeing a new person and going like, hey, who's this guy? Kind of like a talk show host kind of laughing for the sake of it. And I think with the teacup and with Dudley shaking hands with Harry, and Harry really not, wanting to get out of the situation, but kind of feeling sad that Dudley was going away, I think it's definitely on the same note as seeing Draco that helped him keep in touch with Dudley. And although they weren't the best of friends in their previous interactions together, I think Harry and Dudley keeping in touch is definitely a huge part of, the whole forgiveness idea in how Harry and Dudley forgave each other in the light of the new realm. And I'm pretty sure they kept in touch with each other. But even if they didn't, they did leave on a good note. And with the, defeating of Voldemort, I think Harry also saw Dudley not as, a bully like Draco, but as an equal and even a friend. The final topic today that it is very important to mention is the symbolism of the trio taking over the Ministry. So not taking over starting a whole revolution and destroying all the desks and flipping all the chairs, but taking over as in all taking positions of power. Hermione replaced Kingsley Shacklebolt as the leader of the Ministry. Good job, Hermione. Harry became the head of the Auror department, and Ron also, for a short time, joined Harry as an Auror. So, huge positions that these three took. And the symbolism of this is really what I think I want to dive into with this talking point. And mostly, how it reflects in everything they've done so far. So if we really think about it, Harry and Ron were kind of like the core friendship. That's really where the trio started. And Hermione did join in later, but as Harry has said, Hermione was great. She was a great friend, but she'll never be Ron. And as much as I think Hermione's a great friend, I think that's true. Because Harry and Ron really just get each other the most, and Hermione can't really relate to them very well. And because Harry and Ron both became Aurors, I think that just continues to show how alike they are and how they understand each other. And even in the next stage of their lives, in even Quidditch, in studying, they are almost mirroring each other's footsteps. And that just shows that Harry and Ron are just doing everything the same. And that's a very good thing because they're such great friends. And that friendship continues on into their adult life. And that's the same with Hermione, staying close, but not as close as Ron is to Harry, staying, as the leader of the Ministry. And I think the situation is especially mirrored in the finding of Horcruxes. So the whole trio starts out, as the hearts of the gang. And then Harry and Ron, they kind of separate. Ron leaves. That's exactly what Ron does at the Ministry. He leaves his mission as an Auror. And eventually, they kind of do it. It's very difficult. I think what we can kind of assume is eventually Harry also leaves his mission as an Auror. If it's for a different job or if it's for retirement, Harry and Ron then join each other again. And they kind of have, the same friendship as they had before. And then Hermione does eventually have to step down. And when she does, then kind of the whole trio is back together. And it's kind of the same thing that we saw when Ron returned. Ron met Harry first, then Hermione joined the trio back again. And although this is definitely a part of the symbolism, I don't think the core value of what I'm talking about here. The main symbolism, the main, kind of showing of this is how, the wizarding world was after Voldemort. So Voldemort's defeated, and then they kind of have this whole, yay, we did it, this whole celebration, but there's still the Ministry of Magic to tend to. And it's a very common thing for the hero to take over, the good side, stuff like that. And although I don't think it was thought out here, I think Harry, Ron, and Hermione went into the Ministry for a different reason than just Joe's motivation for, I want to make sure that these people end up in the Ministry. I think it was more a showing of how can Harry, Ron, and Hermione continue to be the people that they always were. The magic of the trio is that they are the trio. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are great friends. They have great bonds. They know each other so well. And instead of shifting all of those bonds and changing their relationships, I think if, just because of their going into the Ministry, it shows just how strong they are. And it just goes to show the whole world of how their friendship can just stay the same and they can continue doing the things they have always been doing. And that's a very large part of the story, I think, especially if we're looking back from this, point in the future to back into the story of Harry Potter, kind of thinking about how they were all together kind of working around the same challenges and working through the same goals and moving them all into the Ministry and showing them all the path that is the same, I think is a great way to continue this friendship that they have always had. Just moving them from one place to another as a unit, not thinking of them separately and just happening to move them into the same place, moving the whole chunk of person. Harry and Hermione, that whole block of people, moving them to the same place over and over again. That just is a very creative way of showing how they have created these amazing bonds and how those bonds will likely never break. I think we're done. I think that's it. Nice. That was a great episode. I was very fun to record. And we only got through a couple talking points. I had so many more, but I think that's a good stopping place for this episode. And I'm very excited to move on to some Halloween episodes, some more part 2, some new series. I've got a lot of content planned out, and I hope you will enjoy it when it does come out. I actually just had my first cup of hot cocoa yesterday for the winter, and I am very excited and very proud of myself. So, very, very delicioso. I was very fancy. I put in some marshmallows too, and I always get the same kind of hot cocoa. I always have the same, the same brand, and it always smells the same way. And I always have hot cocoa in the winter, and when I made that first cup and smelled it, I was like, oh man. Smells like winter. So I'm so glad the cold is finally starting. Winter is in fact my favorite season. And around me it does snow, so I love the snow, going out on long walks through the icy nature. So great stuff, winter. I know it's not a lot of people's favorite, but it is my favorite, so that's fun. Yeah, great episode. I am very happy with that. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and if you have anything else you want to add to this episode, if you have anything else you want to add to another episode, go ahead, use those 2 links in the show notes, and Speak by Page link, Google Form link. I would love to hear what you have to say because I love feedback. And if you don't want to use those 2 links, just send me an email. thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com. That is thepotterdiscussion@gmail.com for anything you want me to know. And also make sure to review this show because it helps me out a ton. It helps other people find the show, and it lets them know if it's good or if it's not. Because if it's not good, I don't want them to waste their time. But if it is, I would love it if they listened. All right, I will see you next week. As always, use information to your advantage, and I will see you later.
This was the Potter Discussion.